The first thing I noticed was the envelope. It was already on the counter when I walked into my parents' kitchen, propped neatly beside the fruit bowl, like it had always belonged there. Thick paper, cream-colored. My brother's handwriting on the front. Confident, slanted, unmistakable. I hadn't even taken my coat off yet. For a moment I stood there listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the wall clock. It was late afternoon, that soft stretch of time before dinner, when the house usually felt neutral, almost peaceful. I had come by because my mother asked me to help her review some paperwork. Nothing dramatic, just a few things she said. The way she always said it. I was 31 years old, employed, financially independent, and still somehow summoned like a child when the family needed order restored. I set my bag down slowly and looked at the envelope again. Inside, I already knew was a copy of my parents' updated estate plan. I hadn't been told it existed. I hadn't been asked to review it. And judging by where it was placed, I wasn't meant to open it on my own. It was there to be noticed, to land. My mother came in from the hallway, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her expression carefully neutral. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're early," she said. "I came straight from work," I replied. My voice sounded steady. I surprised myself with that. She nodded and gestured vaguely at the counter. "Your brother stopped by earlier. He dropped that off for your father." I didn't move. "What is it?" She hesitated, just a fraction of a second too long. "It's nothing you need to worry about," she said. "Just paperwork." That was the first lie of the day, not a dramatic one, not cruel, just efficient. I reached for the envelope. My mother's hand came down lightly on top of it. Not forceful, just enough. "Let your father explain it later," she said. "Let's not make this a thing." There it was, the phrase that had shaped most of my adult life. "Don't make this a thing." I withdrew my hand. "Okay," I said. We moved on, or at least she did. She started talking about dinner plans, about my aunt's upcoming birthday, about how tired she'd been lately. I nodded in the right places. I asked the right questions. I played my role. But something had already shifted. That envelope was not just paper, it was a line. I had spent most of my life believing that my position in this family was earned through reliability. I was the one who showed up, the one who listened, the one who handled logistics and smoothed conversations and quietly fixed problems before they became visible. My brother Nathan was different. Louder, more charming, more decisive. He had opinions that filled rooms and confidence that made people lean in. When he spoke, my parents listened. When I spoke, they considered. That difference had always been framed as personality. But personality does not explain paperwork. When my father came home later, he looked tired in the way men do when they've spent years carrying authority they no longer fully understand. He greeted me warmly, kissed my cheek, asked about work. I answered simply. Then he noticed the envelope. He picked it up and glanced at my mother. "Oh," he said. "Right. That was it. No explanation, no acknowledgement that I was standing right there." We sat down at the kitchen table, the three of us, and my father finally cleared his throat. "Nathan and I met with the attorney last week," he said, "just to update things." I waited. He continued, "We're not getting any younger." My mother nodded, eyes fixed on the table. "And it made sense," he added, "to make some adjustments." Adjustments. I folded my hands in my lap. "What kind of adjustments?" He hesitated, then opened the envelope and slid one page toward me. Just one. Not the whole document. My name was there, or rather the absence of it. I scanned the page once, then again, slower this time. The words were precise, legal, unemotional. The family house, the investment account, the business interests my father had built over decades. Assigned to my brother. There was a clause for me. A provision. A smaller, carefully worded section that acknowledged my existence without granting me agency. I felt something tighten in my chest, but my face stayed calm. So I said, "I'm excluded." My mother inhaled sharply. "That's not fair," she said. "You're not excluded." I looked up at her. "I'm not included either." My father leaned back in his chair. "We didn't want to complicate things," he said. "Nathan understands finances. He's better equipped to handle assets." I nodded slowly. "And me?" "You're capable," my mother said quickly. "This isn't about capability." I almost smiled, because that was exactly what it was about. I had spent years being told I was responsible, dependable, steady, and yet when it came time to trust someone with something real, something lasting, those qualities had quietly disqualified me. "What changed?" I asked. My father avoided my eyes. It just made sense. There it was again. Sense, practicality, the language of decisions made without consent. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask why my brother had been involved in conversations I knew nothing about. I simply said, "When were you planning to tell me?" My mother's voice softened. "We hoped you'd understand." I looked at the paper one last time, then slid it back across the table. "I understand," I said, and I meant it. I understood that the trust I thought existed had always been conditional. I understood that my silence had been mistaken for compliance. I understood that what I called love had been structured around convenience and control. I stood, picked up my bag, and smiled politely. "I should go," I said. "I have an early morning." My father frowned. "We can talk more about this later," I said. "Not today." As I drove home, the sky darkened into that early winter gray that makes everything feel slightly unreal. I replayed the conversation in my head, not with anger, but with clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision. And for the first time in my life, I realized that being quiet had not kept me safe. It had made me invisible. That night, I opened my laptop and searched for one thing: family estate attorney. I didn't know yet what I would do, but I knew this: I was done being managed. The attorney's office smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old paper, the kind of place where decisions didn't echo, they settled. I sat in the chair across from her desk with my coat folded neatly in my lap, hands relaxed, posture straight. If you didn't know me, you would have assumed I was there for routine advice. A lease review, a contract question, something ordinary. That was the first advantage. People expect anger from someone who's been cut out. Tears, accusations, a need to be comforted. They prepare defenses for that. They don't prepare for quiet. The attorney's name was Margaret Cole, mid-60s, gray hair pulled back cleanly, glasses perched low on her nose. She didn't smile too much. She didn't rush. She listened in a way that made silence feel productive rather than awkward. She had already reviewed the copy of the document I emailed her the night before. "Your parents didn't violate any laws," she said calmly. "At least not from what I can see." "I didn't think they did," I replied. She looked up at me. That caught her attention. "Most people come in hoping for a loophole," she said. "I'm not looking for one," I said. "I want to understand the structure." She nodded once. "All right." She turned the document toward me and tapped a section with her pen. "This isn't just a will," she said. "It's a layered estate plan, trusts, contingencies, power assignments." I leaned forward slightly. "And my brother?" "He's positioned as executor trustee and primary beneficiary," she said. "That gives him control long before anything is distributed." Control. The word landed exactly where I expected it to. "And me?" I asked. She didn't sugarcoat it. "You're framed as a dependent variable, a conditional beneficiary. You receive something only after specific criteria are met, and those criteria are interpreted by the trustee." "By my brother. So I'm not disinherited," I said. "No," she agreed. "You're managed." I sat back. That word followed me home. Managed. It explained things I hadn't been able to name before. The way decisions were made without me, but about me. The way my reliability had been used as justification to exclude me from authority. The way my silence had been interpreted as agreement. "Why would they do it this way?" I asked. Margaret didn't answer immediately. She watched me for a moment, then said, "Usually families structure plans like this to avoid conflict." I almost laughed. But she continued, "What they actually do is delay it and transfer the burden to the person with the most power." Nathan. I thanked her, paid her, and left without making another appointment. Not because I was done, because I needed to think. Over the next few weeks, nothing dramatic happened. That was almost worse. My parents didn't bring it up again. My brother didn't call. Family messages continued as usual. Group texts about birthdays, a photo of my niece at school, a casual check-in from my mother asking if I'd picked up more work hours lately. It was all normal. Too normal. I started noticing the gaps. The business my father had built, the one he claimed Nathan understood better, had been asking for my input for years. Quietly. I was the one who reviewed vendor contracts. I was the one who flagged accounting inconsistencies. I was the one who stayed late fixing things that would never be credited to me. I had never been on paper. That had been presented as flexibility, trust, family. Now I saw it differently. I wasn't part of the structure. I was labor without leverage. One afternoon, I pulled up my email archives and searched my name alongside the business domain. Years of correspondence appeared. Edits, suggestions, corrections. Decisions routed through me and then formally signed by my father or brother. I exported everything. Not because I planned to use it. Because I needed to see the shape of my involvement laid out in front of me. When you're inside something long enough, you lose perspective. You start believing the role assigned to you is natural, earned, fixed. I had helped build something I did not own, and now I was being told to accept gratitude instead of equity. The next call came on a Sunday morning. My mother's voice was soft, almost careful. Nathan's having people over next weekend, she said. He wanted to know if you'd help organize the catering. There it was. The assumption, the expectation, the quiet assignment. I didn't respond right away. I can't, I said finally. She paused. Why not? I'm busy, I replied. She waited. The silence stretched. Well, she said it would really help him. I closed my eyes. I'm sure it would, I said, but I'm not available. Her voice tightened slightly. You don't have to be difficult. I opened my eyes. I'm not being difficult, I said calmly. I'm just saying no. That word landed differently than I expected. No. There was a sharp inhale on the other end of the line. We're family, she said. We help each other. Yes, I replied, but help isn't automatic. It's voluntary. She didn't answer right away. That sounds cold, she said. I didn't correct her. After we hung up, I sat on my couch and felt the aftershock ripple through me. Not guilt, something else. Relief. Saying no had not collapsed the world. It had simply revealed who expected me to hold it up. That week, I scheduled a second meeting with Margaret. This time, I brought more than documents. I brought questions. What would it look like, I asked, to remove myself from this structure entirely? She raised an eyebrow. You mean legally? Yes. She leaned back. It would mean formal separation, declining roles, disentangling financial overlap. It would mean clarity. And consequences. She nodded. Always. I thought of the house, the business, the future my parents had designed without my consent. I'm ready for that, I said. She studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right, she said. Then we do this cleanly. As I left her office that day, I felt something shift. Not anger, not revenge. Agency. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to what had been done to me. I was deciding what would no longer be done with me. And somewhere between the elevator doors closing and the street outside, I realized something else. This wasn't about inheritance. It was about erasure. And I wasn't going to disappear quietly anymore. The first document I signed was not dramatic. It wasn't a lawsuit, it wasn't a demand, it was a withdrawal. A simple letter drafted by Margaret, formal and restrained, stating that I was resigning from any informal or implied role within the family business, effective immediately. No consulting, no oversight, no unpaid assistance, no assumption of availability. I read it 3 times before signing, not because I was unsure, because I wanted to feel the weight of what I was choosing. For years, my involvement had lived in the gray, not official enough to protect me, not absent enough to free me. That gray space had been comfortable for everyone else. It allowed my parents to say I was included without ever giving me authority. It allowed my brother to rely on me without acknowledging me. It allowed the business to benefit from my labor without compensating it. Gray is where control hides best. Once you step out of it, everything sharpens. I sent the letter by certified mail. 1 copy to the company address, 1 to my father, 1 to my brother. I didn't call first. I didn't explain. The explanation had already been written. Nathan called me the next morning. I let it ring. Then again. Then a text. Hey, got something weird in the mail. Call me. I waited until evening. When I finally picked up, his tone was light practiced. What's this about, he asked. You quitting or something? I'm stepping away, I said. There was a pause. You're serious? Yes. Another pause, longer this time. You didn't talk to Dad about this. I didn't need to. He laughed, but there was tension under it. You can't just walk away like that. I can, I said. And I am. His voice sharpened. You're overreacting. That word again. I pictured the envelope on the counter. The document with my name missing. The trust structure that framed me as a condition instead of a person. No, I said. I'm responding proportionally. He exhaled. This is about the estate thing, isn't it? It's about alignment, I said. I'm not aligned with how things are structured. You're making it personal. I smiled faintly even though he couldn't see it. It was always personal, I said. You just weren't the one paying for it. Silence. Then colder. You're going to regret burning bridges. I'm not burning anything, I replied. I'm stepping off. He hung up without saying goodbye. That night my father called. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. That almost made it worse. Your brother says you resigned, he said. Yes. You didn't think to discuss it first. I've been discussing it for years, I said, just not out loud. He sighed. You're putting us in a difficult position. I considered that. I didn't put myself in this position, I said. I was placed here. That's not fair. I know, I said, that's the point. He was quiet for a long time. Finally, we did what we thought was best. I believe you, I said. But what's best for you isn't what's best for me. He didn't respond. After that, the shift became visible. Emails stopped coming. Requests dried up. The business moved on without me, clumsier than before. A vendor contract lapsed. A payment was delayed. I heard about it indirectly through a cousin who still worked there. No one asked me to help fix it. They couldn't. I had removed myself from the equation. At first, I felt untethered. Not panicked, just unanchored. When you've spent years being the quiet stabilizer, stepping back creates a vacuum. Not just for others, but inside yourself. I filled it deliberately. I updated my resume. Not because I was leaving my job, but because I wanted to see myself clearly on paper. What I did, what I knew, what I had carried, had. I opened a new savings account separate from everything familial. I rerouted automatic payments. I changed passwords. I closed access points I hadn't even realized were still open. Each action was small. Together, they formed a boundary. The next escalation came quietly. A letter from my parents' attorney. Not threatening, not hostile, clarifying. They wanted to confirm that my resignation did not imply future claims. That my withdrawal from informal involvement did not constitute expectation of compensation or ownership. They wanted me to acknowledge that. Margaret read the letter and nodded. "They're trying to close a door," she said. "Which one?" "The one where you could later say you were part of the business." I thought about that. What if I was, I asked. She met my eyes. "Then this gets interesting." I didn't respond right away, because for the first time I wasn't reacting. I was evaluating. Over the next few days, I reviewed everything I had saved. Emails, edits, records, proof of decision-making that had flowed through me even when authority did not. I wasn't listed anywhere, but I was everywhere. I wasn't interested in suing my family. That wasn't revenge, that was chaos. But I was interested in leverage, not to punish, to rebalance. I told Margaret not to respond yet. Instead, I drafted my own letter. It stated that I acknowledged my resignation, that I did not claim ownership, that I did, however, reserve the right to seek compensation for unpaid consulting work should the matter require formal clarification. I didn't accuse. I didn't threaten. I simply refused to erase myself. When the response came, it wasn't from the attorney. It was from my mother. Her message was long, emotional, confused. She wrote about how hurt she was, how this wasn't what she wanted, how families shouldn't involve lawyers, how she didn't recognize me anymore. I read it once, then again. Then I closed my laptop. That night I went for a walk. No music, no phone, just the sound of my own steps and the cold air filling my lungs. I realized something then. The pain I was feeling wasn't from loss. It was from clarity. I wasn't being punished for stepping away. I was being tested. They wanted to see if I would fold, if discomfort would bring me back into alignment, if guilt would do what authority no longer could. I didn't respond to my mother's message. Instead, I scheduled a third meeting with Margaret. "I want to formalize everything I said. Clean lines, no ambiguity." She nodded. "That's wise." "What happens after that?" I asked. She didn't smile. "That depends on how they react when they realize you're no longer adjustable." As I left her office, I felt the familiar pull of doubt try to surface. Was I being too cold? Too rigid? Too final? Then I remembered the envelope on the counter. The decision made without me. And I understood something essential. This wasn't me changing. This was me finally being seen, even if they didn't like what they saw. And once that line is crossed, there is no going back to gray. The house felt different the next time I walked into it. Same floors, same furniture, same faint smell of lemon polish and coffee that had soaked into the walls over decades. But something fundamental had shifted like a room after someone moves out and takes their weight with them. I had not planned to come back so soon. My mother asked. Her message was careful, almost formal. She said my father wanted to talk. She said it would be better in person. She did not say about what. She did not need to. I arrived in the late afternoon. Winter light slanted through the windows, making the living room look softer than it felt. My brother's car was already in the driveway. That told me everything. Nathan was sitting on the couch when I came in, legs crossed, phone in hand, relaxed in a way that only people with assumed authority ever are. He looked up and smiled like this was a casual family meeting, like nothing irreversible had already happened. "Hey," he said, "good timing." I took the chair across from him, not the couch beside him. It was a small choice. It mattered. My parents sat together closer than usual. That also mattered. My father cleared his throat. We need to get on the same page. There it was. The phrase that always meant someone else had already written the page. I am on a page, I said calmly. You might not be. Nathan chuckled under his breath. See this attitude. I didn't look at him. My mother leaned forward. We're worried about you. I nodded once. I know. You've pulled away, she continued. You're involving lawyers. You're talking about compensation like this is a transaction. I met her eyes. It has always been a transaction. You just didn't call it that. My father stiffened. That's not true. It is, I said. It just wasn't written down. Nathan finally leaned in. You're acting like you were exploited. I replied. He scoffed. No one forced you to help. No, I said. You relied on my predictability. That's different. The room went quiet. I could feel it then. The shift from concern to defense, from family to strategy. My father spoke carefully. Your brother is carrying a lot of responsibility. The business, the future. And I carried the past, I said, for free. My mother shook her head. You're making this sound ugly. It was ugly, I said. You just didn't see it because it worked. Nathan stood abruptly. This is insane. You want money now, is that it? I stayed seated. I want separation. That costs money, he snapped. So does control, I said. My father raised his voice slightly. Enough. Nathan sat back down, jaw tight. My father turned to me. What exactly do you want? The question was supposed to put me on the spot, to make me sound unreasonable, to force me into asking for something that could be judged. I had prepared for it. I want formal disengagement, I said. No informal roles, no expectations, no future obligations disguised as family help. And the business, my father asked. I want acknowledgement, I said, of past work. In writing, not praise, not gratitude, recognition. Nathan laughed harshly, unbelievable. I looked at him then. You've benefited from my work for years. This isn't a surprise. It's just no longer invisible. My mother's voice trembled. You're tearing this family apart. I shook my head. I stopped holding it together. There was a difference. My father leaned back, rubbing his temples. You're leaving us no choice. I waited. We'll have our attorney respond, he said. That's fine, I replied. Nathan stood again, pacing now. You know what this looks like, right? You look bitter. You look greedy. I watched him for a moment. No, I said. I look inconvenient. He stopped pacing. That's what this is really about, I continued. I stopped being easy. My mother began to cry quietly, not loudly, not theatrically, just enough to pull attention. Nathan moved toward her instinctively. My father put a hand on her shoulder. I did not. This was the hardest part. Not reacting, not stepping in, not smoothing. Because that reflex was exactly what had been used against me. I didn't come here to argue, I said. I came to inform you. My father's eyes narrowed. Inform us of what? That I will not be part of any future plans you make without me, I said. And I will not absorb discomfort to keep things calm. Nathan scoffed again. Good luck with that. I stood. I'm not asking for luck, I said. I'm done negotiating my worth. As I reached for my coat, my mother spoke through tears. If you walk out now, things won't be the same. I paused. They already aren't, I said. I left without hugging anyone. In the car, my hands shook for a moment. Not from fear, from release. That meeting clarified something essential. They were not confused. They were threatened. Not by my anger, by my boundaries. That night I sent one email. To Margaret. I'm ready, I wrote, proceed. I didn't know yet how far this would go. I didn't know what it would cost emotionally. But I knew this. They had built a future that excluded me. I was no longer willing to protect it. And whatever came next would not be loud. It would be precise. The response came faster than I expected. 2 days after my meeting with my parents, Margaret forwarded me an email from their attorney. Polite, carefully worded, firm in the way professionals are when they believe the structure still favors them. They acknowledged my resignation from informal involvement. They reiterated that I held no official title, no ownership, no contractual claim. They suggested that any further discussion of compensation would be unproductive and risk unnecessary strain on family relationships. That last line was not legal language. It was pressure. Margaret read it once, then looked up at me. They're trying to scare you back into silence. I know, I said. What do you want to do? I thought about the kitchen table, the envelope, the way decisions had been made while I was expected to stay agreeable. I want to make the invisible visible, I said. She nodded. Then we don't argue emotion, we document reality. That was the moment the story stopped being about feelings. We started with a timeline. Not dramatic, not embellished. Just dates, actions, outcomes. Years of email correspondence where I was asked to review contracts. instances where my recommendations were implemented verbatim, meetings I attended without title but with responsibility, decisions routed through me before being finalized by my father or brother. Margaret explained it simply. You don't need ownership to establish value, you need contribution. I had that more than I realized. As we organized the material, something shifted in me. The shame I hadn't even known I was carrying began to loosen. For years, I had internalized the idea that if my role wasn't official, it wasn't real. That if my name wasn't on paper, my work didn't count. That belief had been convenient for everyone else. It took 3 weeks to assemble everything. 3 weeks of quiet focus, no family contact, no updates, no attempts at reconciliation. The silence was not empty, it was intentional. When Margaret sent the formal response, it did not accuse. It did not threaten litigation outright. It outlined facts. It stated that while I did not claim ownership, I reserved the right to pursue compensation for unpaid consulting and advisory services if necessary. It attached documentation. It requested acknowledgement. Nothing more. Nothing less. My parents' reaction was immediate. My mother called first. Her voice was tight controlled in the way it gets when she's trying not to cry. Why are you doing this to us? I answered calmly. I'm not doing anything to you, I'm responding. To what she demanded, we gave you everything. I closed my eyes, not in frustration, in recognition. No, I said, you gave me responsibility, not authority. That's not how family works, she said. It's how control works, I replied. She hung up on me. Nathan texted later that night. This is insane, you're embarrassing the family. I read it once, then I deleted it. I didn't block him, not yet. The next escalation came quietly through a third party. A former colleague from the business reached out to me. Someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. He said he heard I was stepping back and wanted to check in. We met for coffee. He didn't waste time. Things are messy over there, he said. Contracts falling through. People confused about authority. I nodded. I'm not surprised. He hesitated. Your brother's been telling people you were just helping out, that you were never really involved. I felt a flicker of something then, not anger, validation. Is that what you saw, I asked? He shook his head. You were running half the operation. I didn't smile. That conversation confirmed what I already knew. The narrative was shifting, and my brother was trying to control it. That was when Margaret suggested the next step. Would you consider formalizing your role retroactively, she asked. I raised an eyebrow. You can do that? Not fully, she said, but you can establish precedent, advisory contracts, consulting invoices, acknowledgement of past services. I thought about it. This wasn't about squeezing money out of my parents. It wasn't about punishment. It was about leverage. Let's proceed, I said. We drafted invoices, clean, professional, modest considering the scope of work. We didn't send them to the business directly. We sent them to the estate attorney. That was deliberate. Within 48 hours, my father called. Not angry, tired. I don't recognize you, he said. I don't recognize the position you put me in, I replied. You're forcing our hand. I didn't force anything, I said. I responded to what already existed. He was quiet. You know this could get ugly, he said. I know, I replied. That's why I tried silence first. That landed. He sighed. Your mother is devastated. I'm not responsible for her feelings, I said gently. I'm responsible for my boundaries. You were always the easy one, he said. The reasonable one. I almost laughed. That was never my nature, I said. It was my role. Another pause. What do you want, he asked again. This time I answered without hesitation. I want independence, I said. I want clarity. And I want you to stop pretending my contribution didn't exist just because it's inconvenient now. He didn't argue. That's when I knew something had shifted. A week later, their attorney proposed mediation, not litigation. Mediation meant they wanted control back, but quietly. Margaret smiled when she told me. They don't want this on record. Neither do I said. We agreed to the meeting. I walked into the conference room calm, composed, prepared. My brother wouldn't meet my eyes. My parents looked older than they had a month earlier. The mediator explained the process, neutral, procedural. Then my father spoke. He acknowledged my contributions, out loud, in front of witnesses. It wasn't emotional, it wasn't an apology. It was recognition. That was the real turning point. The agreement that followed was simple. A financial settlement. Clean, final. No ongoing ties. No expectations. No informal obligations. In exchange, I formally waived any future claims. I signed without hesitation. So did they. When it was over, my brother stood abruptly and left the room without saying a word. My parents stayed seated. My mother looked at me like she wanted to say something that would fix everything. She didn't. Neither did I. As I walked out of the building, I felt something settle into place. Not victory, freedom. I had not destroyed my family. I had exposed the structure that benefited from my silence. And once exposed, it couldn't hold me anymore. The revenge wasn't loud. It was legal. And it worked. The money hit my account on a Tuesday morning. No ceremony, no explanation, just a notification from my bank, clean and final, a number that represented years of invisible labor now condensed into something measurable. It wasn't life-changing in the way people imagine revenge to be. It didn't make me rich. It didn't make me feel triumphant. It made me feel finished. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in my hands and stared at the screen longer than I needed to. Not because I was afraid it would disappear, but because I wanted to mark the moment. This was the point of no return. By accepting the settlement, I had done more than secure compensation. I had closed a door my family could no longer reopen when it suited them. No more casual requests, no more quiet expectations, no more pretending my presence was optional until my usefulness was required. I forwarded the confirmation to Margaret. She replied with a single sentence, "You're officially disentangled." That word followed me through the day. Disentangled. It sounded clinical, almost cold, but what it actually felt like was space, mental space, emotional space, a kind of silence that wasn't waiting to be filled. My phone stayed quiet that day. No calls from my parents, no texts from my brother, no family group messages pretending everything was normal. I realized something unsettling then. Without me holding the connective tissue, the family didn't know how to speak. That wasn't my fault. That was structure. The first message came 2 days later, from my mother. She didn't mention the agreement. She didn't mention the money. She sent a photo of her garden. Early spring shoots pushing through the soil. "Thought you'd like to see this," she wrote. I stared at it. This was her way of reaching out without acknowledging what had changed, offering beauty instead of accountability. I typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Finally, I wrote, "It's lovely," and left it at that. Boundaries don't have to be cruel. They just have to be consistent. A week later, I received an email from the business. Not from my brother, from their HR department. A generic message informing former contractors of an internal audit and requesting confirmation of non-involvement going forward. I forwarded it to Margaret. She replied, "Do not respond." I didn't. That was the difference now. I didn't feel compelled to explain myself. I wasn't available by default. At work, something else began to happen. With my family no longer draining my attention, my focus sharpened. I noticed details again. I spoke up in meetings without rehearsing. I took on a project I would have previously avoided because it required visibility. My manager pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "You seem lighter." I smiled. "I am." She nodded, then added, "There's an opportunity coming up. A promotion. I'd like you to consider it." In the past, I would have hesitated, worried about time, about balance, about being needed elsewhere. This time I said yes. That night I went home and opened a new document on my laptop, not a legal file, a personal one. I wrote down everything I would no longer do. I will not explain my boundaries to people who benefited from crossing them. I will not confuse obligation with love. I will not accept roles I didn't choose. It felt indulgent at first, then necessary. The family fallout arrived in stages. My father called a month later. His voice was subdued, older. "We're selling the business," he said. I absorbed that. "Oh," I replied. "Nathan's stepping away," he added. "Things didn't go as planned." I didn't ask for details. "I see," I said. He hesitated. "You could have helped." There it was. The final test. I breathed in slowly. "I did help," I said, "for years." Silence. Then quietly, "I know." That was all he said before hanging up. I sat there for a long moment, phone still in my hand. I felt no satisfaction, just clarity. The structure that had excluded me had collapsed under its own weight once my support was removed. Not out of spite, out of inevitability. That was the real karma, not punishment. Exposure. My brother tried once more. A text late one night, short, sharp. "You happy now?" I read it. Then I blocked his number. Not dramatically, not with anger, with finality. The holidays came and went quietly that year. I spent Thanksgiving with friends, Christmas alone by choice. No explanations, no obligations. I cooked what I wanted, I slept in, I took long walks. I noticed how my body felt when it wasn't braced. Lighter, calmer. I wasn't lonely. I was at peace. One evening, as I was closing my laptop after work, I caught my reflection in the dark screen. I looked different. Not younger, not harder. Clearer. I had spent most of my life believing that being chosen meant being included. I know now that being chosen by myself was the only thing that ever mattered. And the strangest part? Once I stopped fighting for a seat at their table, I realized I didn't want to sit there anymore. I had my own place to build. And for the first time, it would be built on terms I had written myself. The quiet didn't last. It never does. It took about 3 months for the vacuum to do what vacuums always do. It pulled something in. The call came from an unfamiliar number on a Thursday afternoon while I was at work. I let it go to voicemail. When I checked later, I recognized the voice immediately. It was my aunt, my mother's younger sister. Her tone was careful, almost rehearsed. She said she'd heard things were tense. She said she didn't want to get involved, but she was worried. She said family was family. I didn't call her back that day. I waited until the weekend, until I had space to hear what was actually being said beneath the words. When I did call, she didn't waste time. "Your mother's not doing well," she said. "She's taking this very hard." I leaned against my kitchen counter and listened. "She feels like she's lost you," my aunt continued. "She keeps saying she doesn't understand what went wrong." I let that sit. "What she doesn't understand," I said finally, "is that nothing went wrong. Something ended." My aunt sighed. "You don't have to punish her." I closed my eyes. "I'm not punishing anyone," I said. "I'm protecting myself." There was a pause. "Well, she said your brother's been struggling." That didn't surprise me. "The business sale didn't go the way your father hoped," she continued. "Nathan's had some setbacks." I could hear the invitation forming. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. Another pause, longer this time. "He could use support." There it was. The old script delivered by a different actor. I straightened. "No, just that." She inhaled sharply. "You don't even want to know what's going on." "I know enough," I said, "and I'm not available." "You sound cold." I smiled faintly. "I sound finished." She didn't argue after that. But the message had been sent. The family system was probing the perimeter, testing whether the boundary was real or just performative. It was real. The next attempt came disguised as nostalgia. An email from my father with photos attached. Old ones. Holidays. Birthdays. Me and Nathan as kids standing too close, smiling because we were told to. "I found these cleaning out the office," he wrote. "Thought you might want them." I stared at the screen for a long time. This was not manipulation in the villain sense. It was something quieter. Grief mixed with habit. The instinct to restore equilibrium by pulling me back into my old position. I replied simply, "Thank you, I have copies." And I meant it. The photos didn't hurt. They clarified. That was when I realized something important. I had not left my family. I had left a role. And roles don't disappear quietly. They look for replacements, or they try to pull you back. At work, the promotion process moved forward. Interviews, meetings, conversations about leadership and long-term planning. I spoke differently now, not louder, clearer. When I was offered the position, I accepted without asking anyone's opinion. That would have been unthinkable a year earlier. I told my parents afterward briefly, not to seek approval, to inform. My mother replied with congratulations and a sad face emoji. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, because I didn't need to soothe. The real test came in the form of a family gathering. A cousin's wedding. Summer. Out of state. A neutral location where people like to pretend history resets. The invitation arrived in the mail addressed to me alone. No note, no pressure. I debated for days. Not because I was afraid of seeing them, because I was evaluating whether going would cost me anything. In the end, I decided to attend. Not for them, for myself. I wanted to see who I was now in a room that used to define me. The wedding was beautiful. Open air, soft music, warm light. I arrived alone. I could feel eyes on me as I crossed the lawn. Curious, assessing. My parents looked surprised to see me. My mother smiled too brightly. My father nodded. Nathan avoided me entirely. That told me everything. Throughout the evening, people approached me carefully. Asked about work, about life, about how I was doing. I answered honestly. "Well," I said, "peaceful." Some nodded like they understood. Others looked uncomfortable. Near the end of the night, my mother approached me. "You look different," she said quietly. "I am," I replied. She hesitated. "I wish you'd come home more." I looked at her, really looked. "I wish you'd known me better when I was there," I said. It wasn't said with anger. It was said with fact. Her eyes filled, but she didn't argue. That was new. As I drove back to my hotel that night, I felt a sense of completion I hadn't expected. I had entered the old environment without shrinking. I had not been pulled back. The system had tried. It always does. But systems lose power when you stop performing the function they were built around. The revenge was no longer active. It was sustained. Every time I chose myself without explanation. Every time I declined to be the solution. Every time I refused to carry discomfort that wasn't mine. I didn't need my family to understand. I needed them to adjust. And slowly they were. Not because I demanded it, because there was no other option. That was the quiet triumph. And it was enough. The aftermath didn't announce itself. It arrived in fragments. A forwarded article about resilience from my mother, an accidental like on one of my social posts from my father that disappeared seconds later, a cousin's message asking if I'd heard from Nathan lately. I didn't respond to most of it, not out of cruelty, out of discernment. I had learned the difference between communication and extraction. One respects your presence, the other tests your availability. Nathan tested it first. Not directly. He had learned that path was closed. Instead, he tried something subtler. An email from a recruiter landed in my inbox one morning. Complimentary, specific, referenced my recent promotion. The sender mentioned my brother by name, said he had spoken highly of my abilities, and thought we might be a good fit. I read it twice. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was familiar. Nathan had always known how to reframe reality to suit his needs. If he couldn't control me directly, he'd attempt to control the narrative around me. Position himself as generous, supportive. The bridge, not the barrier. I forwarded the email to Margaret with a short note. Thoughts? She replied quickly. Classic repositioning, do not engage. I didn't. I declined the recruiter, politely citing current commitments. I didn't mention my brother. Let the silence speak. A week later, my father called again. This time his voice was measured, careful, as if he were speaking to someone whose reaction he could no longer predict. I've been thinking, he said. I waited. You were right, he continued, about some things. I let that land. The business, he said. The way we structured it, the assumptions we made. I didn't rush to comfort him. I didn't interrupt. I thought I was being practical, he said. But I see now how that practicality depended on you not pushing back. There it was. Not an apology. An admission. I appreciate you saying that, I replied. He hesitated. I don't know how to fix it. You can't, I said gently. You can only respect what exists now. He was quiet. Then I'll try. That was enough. Not forgiveness. Acknowledgement. After that call, something unexpected happened. I stopped thinking about them as much. Not in a dramatic, triumphant way. In a quiet, practical one. Like you stop thinking about a room you no longer live in. My life filled in around the space they had occupied. I made new routines. Morning walks, weekly dinners with friends who knew me without history, long stretches of time where no one expected anything from me unless I offered it. I noticed how my body responded. No tightness in my chest when my phone buzzed, no rehearsed explanations, no preemptive guilt. I slept deeply. One evening, months later, I received a message from Nathan. Not angry, not pleading, neutral. I'm seeing a counselor, he wrote. They suggested I reach out, not for money, just to acknowledge things. I stared at the message for a long time. This was new. Not the content, the timing. He had waited until the system around him had fully shifted, until the leverage was gone, until the reach was uncertain. I typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. In the end, I wrote one sentence. I'm glad you're getting support. Nothing more, nothing less. I did not open the door. I did not slam it either. Boundaries don't require hostility to hold. The final confirmation came from an unexpected place. A mutual acquaintance ran into me at a conference, someone who knew my family through business circles. I heard about your brother, he said carefully. About the sale. I nodded. He didn't handle it well, the man continued. People were surprised. They always thought you were the quiet one. I smiled faintly. I said, quiet isn't the same as absent. He laughed a little awkwardly. Fair enough. That was when it hit me. The story had moved beyond the family. The version of me that existed only in their orbit no longer defined how others saw me. I wasn't correcting narratives. I wasn't defending myself. I was living differently, and that difference carried its own authority. That night, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine and watched the city lights come on one by one. I thought about the version of myself who would have spent this time worrying, planning, anticipating reactions. She felt far away. Not erased, integrated. I understood something then that I hadn't before. The deepest revenge isn't proving someone wrong. It's becoming uninterested in their approval. It's refusing to contort yourself to fit a structure that was never built for you. It's letting the consequences play out without interference. I didn't win by outmaneuvering my family. I won by exiting the game. And in doing so, I reclaimed something far more valuable than inheritance or acknowledgement. I reclaimed authorship. Of my time, of my energy, of my life. The rest was just noise fading in the distance. I didn't expect the anger to come after the peace. That was the mistake. People assume anger is the first response, the loud one, the messy one. But in my case, anger waited until there was finally room for it. Until my body was no longer braced. Until I was safe enough to feel it without being consumed. It arrived one quiet morning while I was folding laundry. No trigger, no call, no memory replay, just a sudden sharp clarity that cut through the calm. I had been used, not dramatically, not maliciously in the beginning, but consistently, systematically, in ways that had shaped my choices without my consent. I sat down on the edge of my bed with a towel still in my hands and let that realization settle fully for the first time. I wasn't angry at my brother. I was angry at the structure that taught him he was entitled to my steadiness. I was angry at my parents for mistaking my compliance for character. I was angry at myself for learning early that love came with conditions and then performing them well. That anger didn't want an audience. It wanted accuracy. I channeled it into something precise. I opened my old notebooks. Not legal ones. Personal ones. The kind I had kept on and off for years. Pages filled with half-thoughts. Apologies I never sent. Notes from conversations that left me unsettled but unable to name why. I read them slowly. Patterns emerged. Moments where I minimized my needs to avoid being labeled difficult. Times I had been praised for being easy right after something had been taken from me. Instances where my brother's chaos was framed as leadership and my stability as support. This wasn't just a family issue. It was training. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. That afternoon, I called Margaret. I want to revisit something I said. Legally, she asked. No, I replied, personally. She listened as I spoke, not interrupting, not redirecting. When I finished, she said something that stayed with me. You didn't just exit a bad arrangement, she said. You interrupted a pattern. That doesn't feel like revenge, I said. It's more disruptive than revenge, she replied. I thought about that. Disruption doesn't announce itself. It destabilizes quietly. That realization shifted something in me. I stopped thinking about closure. Closure implies mutual understanding. I started thinking about completion. Completion is internal. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak on a panel at work. Women in leadership. The invitation framed me as someone who had navigated complexity with integrity. I almost declined. Then I realized something. Declining would have been old behavior. I accepted. On the day of the panel, I sat under bright lights and answered questions from women who were navigating their own invisible roles, their own quiet extra labor, their own unacknowledged contributions. One question stood out. How do you know when it's time to stop being the responsible one? I didn't answer immediately. Then I said, when responsibility only flows in one direction, it's no longer responsibility, it's extraction. The room went still. Afterward, a woman approached me. She was older, probably in her 60s. She told me she'd spent decades holding her family together at the cost of her own health. I wish I'd heard that sooner, she said. I drove home that night feeling something unexpected. Not vindicated. Useful. In a different way. That was when I realized the final layer of this story wasn't about my family at all. It was about reclaiming meaning. The anger had sharpened me. Not into someone bitter. Into someone exact. I didn't need to forgive. I didn't need to forget. I needed to integrate. The next time my mother called, her voice was softer than it had been in months. I've been thinking about some things she said. I listened. I see now that I leaned on you too much, she continued. I thought I was teaching you to be strong. I exhaled slowly. Strength without choice isn't strength, I said. It's survival. She didn't argue. She just said, I'm sorry. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't complete. But it was real. And for the first time, I could hear it without collapsing inward. That was the difference. I had my feet under me now. Anger had done its job. It had drawn the final boundary. Not against them, but within myself. And once that line was drawn, I knew something with certainty. I would never again trade my peace for belonging. No matter who was asking, no matter how softly, the confrontation I had imagined for years never came. No shouting, no slammed doors, no moment where everything exploded and reset itself. What came instead was quieter and in some ways more unsettling. It came as paperwork. A thick envelope arrived at my apartment one afternoon, forwarded from my parents' address. My name typed cleanly on the front. Inside were copies of documents I recognized immediately: revised estate papers, amendments, addenda. They had changed it. Not back to what it was before. Not enough to restore what had been lost, but enough to acknowledge that something had been wrong. There was a short note from my father, handwritten. His handwriting had grown shakier over the years. "We wanted you to have this for your records. No pressure, just transparency." Transparency. I sat at my kitchen table and read every page slowly. I was no longer framed as a conditional afterthought. I was listed separately, cleanly, with language that did not require interpretation by anyone else. It wasn't generous. It was corrective, and that mattered more. I noticed what wasn't included, too. There was no apology written into the margins, no explanation, no attempt to justify the delay. The documents did not pretend the past hadn't happened. They simply adjusted the future. I understood then that this was the only repair my parents were capable of offering. Not emotional reckoning, structural change. I didn't rush to respond. That was another new habit. A week passed, then another. In that time, I watched myself carefully. Did this make me feel vindicated? No. Did it make me feel relieved? A little. Mostly it made me feel confirmed. My decision to step away had forced a recalibration that nothing else could have achieved. Not talking, not explaining, not sacrificing more. Distance had done what proximity never could. When I finally called my father, I didn't thank him. I said I received the documents. He exhaled audibly. All right. We sat in silence for a few seconds. Then he said your mother wanted to call you herself. I told her to wait. I appreciated that more than I said. I'm not coming back into the fold, I said calmly. I need that to be clear. I know, he replied. I'm not resuming any role, I continued. Not in the business, not as mediator, not as support system. I know, he repeated. I want a relationship, I said, but not at the cost of myself. He was quiet for a long moment. Then that's fair. That word again. Fair. It came late, but it came. Nathan did not reach out after the documents changed. That told me something important. This wasn't about reconciliation for him. It was about hierarchy. And the hierarchy had shifted. I saw him once more that year, briefly. At a holiday gathering I attended for an hour and left early. He nodded at me, polite, distant. There was no hostility. There was something else. Loss of footing. For the first time, he didn't know where he stood with me, and I didn't rush to clarify. At work, my life continued to expand. The promotion came with authority I was ready for. I made decisions without asking permission. I delegated. I set limits. People respected them, not because I demanded it, because I enforced them. I thought often about how much of my family's story had followed me into my professional life without my noticing. How being the reliable one had felt virtuous even when it cost me. Now reliability looked different. It included myself. One evening, months after the documents arrived, my mother called. She sounded calmer than she had in years. I'm learning to sit with things, she said, without fixing them. I smiled to myself. That's new, I said gently. Yes, she admitted, and uncomfortable. I know, I replied. She hesitated. I miss you. I didn't soften the truth. I miss parts of you too, I said. That honesty felt cleaner than comfort ever had. When the call ended, I sat with the feeling that followed. Not grief, not joy, resolution. The story had reached its final shape, not because everyone agreed, but because I no longer needed them to. The revenge had never been about punishment. It had been about reclaiming authorship over my life. And now that authorship was uncontested, I didn't need to prove anything. I had already rewritten the ending. On my own terms. I thought the story was finished. That was my mistake. Resolution isn't an ending. It's a plateau. And plateaus are where you finally see the full landscape of what you survived. The last complication didn't come from my brother or my parents. It came from something more subtle, more dangerous. It came from habit. A few months after the revised documents arrived, after work had settled into a rhythm that felt earned rather than extracted, I noticed myself doing something familiar. I was volunteering to take on extra responsibility again. Not because I had to, not because anyone asked, but because the old reflex was still there, humming quietly beneath my awareness. The instinct to stabilize, to preempt, to be the one who makes things easier before anyone notices there was strain. It startled me. I caught it one afternoon when a colleague asked if I could just help smooth things over between two departments. I opened my mouth to say yes automatically, and then I stopped. I felt it clearly then, that old internal equation. If I help, I am valued. If I refuse, I risk disapproval. That equation had governed my family life for decades. I closed my mouth. I can help outline options, I said carefully, but I won't mediate. There was a brief pause. Then my colleague nodded. That works. Nothing broke. No one punished me. The world did not collapse. I walked back to my office with a strange mix of pride and grief. Pride for catching myself. Grief for how long it had taken to learn. That night I wrote something new in my personal document. Not a boundary, a rule. I am not responsible for preventing discomfort. It sounds simple. It isn't. A week later, I got an email from my parents' attorney again. This time, not about documents, about logistics. They were updating medical directives, emergency contacts, end-of-life preferences. They wanted to list me. I stared at the email longer than I expected to. This wasn't manipulation. It wasn't control. It was something closer to trust, or maybe necessity, or maybe habit trying to reassert itself in a gentler form. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I called Margaret. She listened, then asked one question. Do you want that role? I thought about it carefully. Not about what it meant to them, about what it would cost me. I want involvement, I said slowly. Not responsibility by default. She nodded, then say that. So I did. I replied to the attorney with one paragraph. I said I was willing to be informed, willing to be consulted, willing to participate when possible, but not positioned as the primary decision maker, not the failsafe, not the stabilizer. The response came the next day. Acknowledged. No argument. That was when I realized something important. Once you change the rules, people adapt faster than you expect. It's the waiting that hurts, not the boundary. My mother called that evening. I read the email, she said. I'm trying to understand. I know, I replied. She hesitated. It feels like you don't trust us. I considered my words carefully. It feels like I finally trust myself, I said. She was quiet. Then softer, that makes sense. I didn't expect that. The real closing moment came unexpectedly on an ordinary afternoon. I was cleaning out an old box from my closet, papers, photos, things I had carried from apartment to apartment without ever opening fully. At the bottom of the box was a notebook I didn't recognize. Inside were notes I had written in my early 20s. Lists, goals, promises to myself. One page stopped me cold. It was a list titled Who I Am Trying to Be. The items were simple, reliable, low maintenance, supportive, not a problem. I sat on the floor with that notebook in my hands and felt something finally loosen. That version of me had been trying so hard to earn safety. She didn't know she was allowed to choose it instead. I turned the page and wrote a new list. Clear, autonomous, accountable to myself, present by choice. I closed the notebook and put it back in the box. Not because I needed to remember it, but because I wanted to honor the distance traveled. That night, I had dinner with friends. Women who knew my story, not as drama, but as context. We talked about work, aging parents, the strange freedom that comes with midlife clarity. One of them asked, "Do you ever wish it had gone differently?" I thought about my brother, my parents, the business, the inheritance that had almost defined me by its absence. No, I said, because then I might never have learned what my silence was costing me. They nodded, they understood. That was enough. I went home later than usual, tired in a good way. I stood at my window and looked out at the city lights again. I felt no urge to explain myself to anyone, no urge to correct the past, no urge to rescue. The story wasn't unresolved. It was complete, not because everyone healed, but because I did. And once that happens, there is nothing left to fight for, only something to protect. Myself, one deliberate choice at a time. The last thing that changed was my definition of peace. For a long time, I thought peace meant the absence of conflict. Quiet phones, neutral holidays, conversations that didn't drift toward landmines. I believed peace was something fragile that had to be protected by careful behavior. I was wrong. Peace is not fragile. It's selective. It chooses what it allows near it. The year after everything settled, my life looked ordinary from the outside. Same city, same job title, just with more authority. Same routines, just less urgency. If you didn't know the story, you wouldn't see the shift. But inside, everything was different. I woke up without scanning my body for tension. I made decisions without imagining how they would be received. I rested without feeling like I was neglecting someone. That was the real inheritance. Not money, not recognition. Choice. My parents and I found a rhythm that worked because it was honest. We spoke less often but more clearly. There were no hidden expectations, no emotional invoices sent after the fact. When I visited, I stayed on my terms. When I left, I didn't feel pulled back by guilt. My mother learned to sit with silence instead of filling it. My father learned to ask instead of assume. Neither of them became different people. They became more accurate ones. Nathan remained distant. That distance no longer felt like rejection. It felt like alignment. We had outgrown each other's narratives, and that was allowed. The last time I heard about him, it was through someone else. He had moved, changed fields, started over in a quieter way. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need updates. Some stories don't require closure. They require boundaries that hold. At work, I noticed younger women gravitating toward me, not because I was loud or commanding, but because I was clear. They asked how I learned to say no without apologizing, how I stopped carrying responsibility that wasn't mine. I didn't give them speeches. I told them the truth. It wasn't one big moment, I said. It was a series of small decisions where I chose myself even when it felt uncomfortable. That's how most lives actually change. Not with explosions, with quiet refusals. One evening, close to the anniversary of the day I first opened that envelope in my parents' kitchen, I took myself out to dinner. No reason, no milestone, just because I could. I sat by the window, ordered what I wanted, and watched the city move around me. Couples, families, women my age and older carrying their own stories in their posture, their eyes, their pauses. I thought about how many of us were taught the same lesson early. Be good, be easy, be useful. And how rarely anyone taught us when to stop. I paid the bill, left a generous tip, and walked home slowly. That night, I opened my old document one last time. The one that had followed me through this entire transformation. Lists, rules, boundaries, truths. I added a final entry. I do not owe access to people who benefited from my silence. I do not owe comfort to systems that thrived on my compliance. I owe myself a life that does not require shrinking to maintain peace. Then I closed the file. I didn't need it anymore. The revenge story people expect is loud, confrontational, final in a way that demands witnesses. This wasn't that. This was quieter. I didn't destroy anyone. I didn't expose secrets publicly. I didn't win an argument. I withdrew my labor. I reclaimed my autonomy. I refused to play the role assigned to me without consent. And the system adjusted around my absence. That is the kind of revenge that lasts. If you are listening to this and something in it feels uncomfortably familiar, I want you to know this. You are not difficult for wanting boundaries. You are not selfish for choosing yourself. You are not disloyal for stepping away from dynamics that cost you your dignity. Love that requires self-erasure is not love. Peace that depends on your silence is not peace. And family that only works when you disappear is not a family you are obligated to serve. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what moment in your life taught you to choose yourself. Share it in the comments. And if stories like this matter to you, please like and subscribe so more people who need them can find them. Wherever you are tonight, I hope you remember this. The moment you stop asking for permission to exist as you are, everything changes. Quietly and forever.